Dungeon Master has placed you in a dreadfully precarious position.
Dungeon Master and Dwarven Sword Master, Hobgoblins, Dwarves, Elves, and Halflings are some of the characters and terms used in this very complicated and controversial game.
You're playing the most phenomenal game ever created.
Well, welcome everyone. New year, some more natural ones. It's been a while. Yeah, the Devil's Theater says it's been a minute. It's been a month, I think. Welcome Black Lodge Games and Shane Winter.
Good evening.
Praxis. Anyways, joined as ever by Victor Gorchev.
Hoi iedereen. Our
guest at the start of the new year is John N. McGowan, who has written a wonderful book that I've skimmed through called The Living Campaign, and I'm excited to talk. I think Vic's excited to talk to him about it too. Yeah. I won't speak for him, but
I'm always excited.
Well, he's here, and that's all I ask. So
yeah.
But John, welcome to the show, and I'm excited to talk to you about your book, man.
Oh yeah, thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Yeah. What is this? What is John sick with now? I am not sick right now. I am fully recovered after being perpetually sick since Thanksgiving, which has not been fun. Yeah. So for the moment, I'm healthy. So we'll see what happens when my daughter goes back to school tomorrow and what she brings home.
Yeah.
But, yeah, thank you. But yeah, John, you've written this book, The Living Campaign.
Yes.
And I want to real quick. For everyone else, the link is in the video description, but I'm gonna find it here and throw it in chat as well. You can get it on Amazon. I guess we'll start with tell us a little bit about yourself. Actually, let's start there. You know, what was your entry point into the hobby? You know, maybe how have your views in the hobby changed over time? Because I think a lot of ours have. At least I would hope so. I hope we're growing and evolving as members in this hobby. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I'm just interested in oftentimes where people come from and where they're at this moment as well in the hobby. So.
Okay, yeah. So my first introduction to Dungeons and Dragons was in I think 2001 or something, with Neverwinter Nights, on my cousin's computer. And I didn't know how anything of these things were working. I didn't understand the stats I was looking at or anything like that. But I was kind of intrigued, I was intrigued by this spread of numbers and points and pluses and minuses. And then, fast forward, so I'm kind of that's the primer, fast forward 4 or 5 years, we end up at 2006, 2007, and I get invited to a 3.5, kind of the beginning of a campaign, session 1 of a campaign. And so I D&D's pitched me, kind of as a thing you can do anything in. You have a total open agency. And I was really intrigued by this. So I kind of went with a few mutual friends to the Dungeon Master's house, and he kind of ran his game, and session 1 was a complete disaster, and the campaign died right there. But I was I was very satisfied. Me and a couple other buddies. Some people left very angry that night, but we had a really there was. I knew there was something special there. I knew this campaign couldn't continue, but I was no. I was kind of chasing that high ever since of the completely open game. So and it might have been a junkyard D&D experience for an opening, but yeah, it was definitely It's definitely formative. I think I think about it often. So
I think everybody's first game is a complete disaster. Like you kind of have to expect that, and I think players should expect that if they're going to join a game and you're like, hey, it's my first time DMing. Like I don't know,
yeah,
go easy on them. They've never done this before.
No,
Exactly.
no, and looking back, looking back on this poor guy, like he as a player, like this was his first time DMing, but he had been a player for years, and he actually did a really good job of like respecting the choices of the players. It just sort of it was sort of the players, like all the personalities like just didn't mix at the end of the night. But
yeah, that happens. I've had games like that before.
Yeah.
So you started in 3.5 and then did you like stick with 3.5? Did you skip 4th? Did you go to 5th? When are you still playing? What are you playing now? I'm shotgun blasting you a bunch of questions here.
Sure. I'll try to handle those. I stuck with 3.5 for several years, and it was sort of like the first system I ever bought was 4th.
Okay.
And this was like I was brand new to the hobby, so like I didn't know that there were multiple editions of the same game. I saw Dungeons and Dragons on the cover, and I bought the book.
I did the same thing.
Yeah, it was basically how it went. And so I get this game, and we had a good time with 4th, but like none of us kind of knew what we were doing, so we played like maybe 2 or 3 sessions, and then we got invited back into a 3.5 campaign, where we were sort of memed into dropping 4th forever. So then we stuck with 3.5 for a long time. I would join as a player every now and then, and eventually I got so frustrated I started my own game, which by this point Pathfinder had come out, and I started with a Pathfinder first edition. I planned running that campaign in like 2008, 2009 or something like that, and we've been kind of going back to consistently this kind of the same campaign world. Now I do have an online game where I still run Pathfinder for the same guys, because they do like the more video gamey character building. Like character building is a meta game in a game, and people really enjoy it.
Yeah, exactly.
But then and then for my home game though, we sort of switched to AD&D, because we were playing Pathfinder here. And we did it for a few years, and we played a few sessions of AD&D first edition. And my players here did a much more, because it's really more of like there's not a skill list. They're not constantly referring to like a bunch of numbers. Pretty much everything about it is a little more like keyed to their interests and the things that they gravitate towards. So,
yeah, I think the first time I ran first edition, I was intimidated to do it because you hear horror stories about it. A lot of people talk about how terrible, like not how terrible of a game it is, but they're like it's organized poorly and nothing makes sense, and the typical excuses against it. Which some of it is valid. Okay, the book isn't organized maybe to everyone's liking. I get that, or the books, I guess. But like when we started playing and playing it, I was like, this is maybe part of the pinnacle of what this game could be, and there's not many games that kind of top it. For me, like 0E is kind of there, like equal with it as far as regarded by me personally. Yeah. But not much for me. Not much after for 1E is as appealing, I guess.
Yeah, well, and I think part of like first edition's reputation has a lot to do with sort of the way information was transferred in the 70s and the 80s. So it's like you didn't really have like the internet like the way we do now, and like the way we communicate. So you basically kind of had like folk tales of just how complicated this thing was, like AD&D first edition, and then when you really hold it up blow for blow against like third edition, fourth edition, fifth edition, it's simpler. At the end of the day, 0E and 1E is simpler, like notwithstanding the intern who compiled, the Dungeon Master's Guide, so because like Gary goes on, like he has like 3 paragraphs to describe segments, when really at the end of the day, all segments is like you don't ever have to think about them except under like 2 or 3 very specific circumstances.
Sure.
Which is basically Yeah, spells
and weapon class, weapon speed, like.
Yeah, right. And it's like, because like, the casting time is basically weapon speed for spells. It's not like once you sort of like realize like, he's a lot of words to kind of like convey this fairly simple in actual play concept. So I think a lot of that is why that happened.
Yeah, I think this one here. Editions after Gary do not have the same feeling. And I kind of agree with that, because we can say it that those editions after Gary didn't have Gary. They didn't have one of the original people there behind it who really understood the game, putting their voice in it, I think. And I think you can read that. Although Vic has been, you've been diving into 2E, and I don't have a lot of hate for 2E. It's just like I know a lot of people look at 2E fondly, but it's just I have 1E and I just don't feel the need to get 2E, I guess.
Yeah, it still has like a lot of the 1E isms, but then it just has like some extra stuff, and it went a little bit more in that, that's the era of Dragonlance and stuff like that. So it kind of went like a little bit more in that direction. People say it's like the 5e of like the 90s basically. So, but
okay,
yeah, it kind of like people kind of had like the same reaction to it that some of the more grognardy people have now towards 5e. But I don't know, I like it. I like 2E.
Black Lodge Games 2E sucks.
Yeah, but they're Vampire the Masquerade players. They don't get to say shit.
Yeah, 2E. The only experience I have with 2E is Baldur's Gate 1 and 2 on the PC. So
yeah, it's funny you mentioned Everwinter's Night, because my first introduction to D&D was Baldur's Gate 1. And see, I grew up in a very like evangelical home where you weren't allowed to play D&D. That was evil and satanic. So, I kind of tricked my mom. We were like at Kmart or Walmart or something, and it was in the, the software game section. And I was like, can I get this game? And it was like, it was super cheap. It wasn't super expensive because maybe Baldur's Gate 2 was already out or something. I don't remember, but it wasn't expensive. And so I took it home and I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't understand Descending Armor class. So I was telling Vic about this. Like I had equipped this character. It's like the armor class is, it's a bigger number than the armor class of this one. So it must be better. And so like, why am I dying all the time?
I had the same thing actually, so yeah.
And I'd get really frustrated, and then I eventually figured it out. But,
That's funny. So yeah, like that's exactly my trajectory in Neverwinter Nights. But Baldur's Gate 1 and 2, I actually played for the first time in like 2021.
Oh, okay.
I was very late to the party on that one, and that was my it probably would have been like 2020. I probably would have been a little earlier, probably like during, because I think that was when I was like starved for entertainment for some reason I can't remember, and so I was like kind of just combing through, and it was like $3 or $4 or whatever for both on Steam, so I just picked them up, and that was my first inkling that there was something to AD&D, honestly. I was like, I had a blast with it, and so I still think 3rd edition and 3.x editions do probably translate to video games maybe better than I think the editions before or since, somewhat, because there's that whole customizable factor, the feats and like the numbers plug in, and it seems to be an edition made for video games in a way that maybe perhaps the others are not.
Agreed. That edition really rewards you breaking the game, like as a player, can I build something that will break the game, and it rewards you for it. So, and I 100% get why players like that. It's oftentimes a nightmare for the GM, but
it rewards players that can keep track of all the little pluses and minuses and bonuses and all that stuff, which I'm really bad at. Like like even stuff that I write myself, I forget what the rules are. So let alone like keeping track of that stuff. So, but yeah, like players like the rules lawyer types, like they tend to love like 3rd edition and like Pathfinder 1st edition and stuff like that. So
no, it's definitely the case.
So bringing it back to your books, I want to make sure we talk about your book. That's what you're here for.
Oh, sure.
What gave you like the impetus to want to write this book in the first place? What made you sit down and go like, I want to write a book about how to run a D&D campaign? or at least how you think you should run a D campaign and give advice,
Yeah. Well, I was so like I ran my campaigns traditionally, like the tradition, like as what is it, the contemporary way, I guess, like what we consider the default now. And so I ended up, let me think. So I was very good at like the kind of the narrative railroad, in the sense like the players wouldn't perceive the tracks. So like I actually do come from that school of like basically trying to hoodwink players into not seeing like the puppet strings. And what you find is that like I'd eventually sort of get burnout or whatever, and we probably go, I can usually go like 2 or 3 years in one of those types of campaigns before I'm like, all right, we need to start figuring out how to wrap it up. I maybe not in those words. It's sort of but yeah, I was very good at drawing it to kind of its conclusion. And anyway, so I got kind of involved. I fell down like a rabbit hole of sort of older edition stuff again after playing Baldur's Gate, and then realizing maybe there's some wisdom to be had from the earlier editions. Like we didn't actually improve; it's just different. And what I learned, like so then I started like what that involved was getting involved in war games. Like you can't really, there's no two ways about it. If you're going to go kind of back to like TTRPG's roots, you have to go through war games. And so I've read, like I said, I don't have like a ton of experience with war games, but I've read a lot of the literature that more into like hardcore like war games players are reading. Like I've read Bath, I've read, I got Penry Hyde on my shelf. I think Don Featherstone's probably kind of one of the big luminaries I haven't read yet, but that's certainly on my list. And anyway, so yeah, so kind of again all around really roundabout way of saying. So what I figured out is kind of the mechanisms by which you can create a sandbox with full player agency. And what I also saw was that all of the advice in order to do this was bad. I'm not, I'm not, I'm kind of planting my flag there, and it's just, it wasn't good. It's not working. And I judge working, not based on like anecdotal, it worked for me, but based on replicability. And these tables were not iterating. So success stories, you could not gauge like based on whose advice. There was no kind of like, what is it? Like successful set of like tips that were sort of iterating across tables, and you weren't seeing an increase in tables. So that's when I decided like, okay, like I've kind of got it working, and I don't want to discount, part of that rabbit hole was kind of like Crossface's Twitter, Jeff Rowe Johnson, B-Dubs's a blog, definitely kind of going through like what he was describing there with his Axe campaign. And yeah, so like, yeah, that was, and that was that. So then I wanted to add my 2 cents to it, basically, because I had the unique perspective of coming from the modern campaign style and abandoning it.
Yeah,
the modern campaign style. So
I think I come from the same camp. I was always trying to lay the railroad down in my 4E and 5E games without having the players know that the rail was there. And if I could trick the players, I considered that a success for like the longest time.
Right.
And then eventually I got tired of all that because it was a lot of work to do. The prep for that was just astronomical in some cases to make things work out the way I wanted them to, or the way I felt they should. Right. And the moment I let go and just let the players do whatever they want, I was so much happier.
It's a lot easier, because that prep, man, it's like, it's not fun. That's its biggest crime. So
like when there was one, I remember when the first time I showed up to a session and it's like, here's the map of like the campaign map. You guys are starting here. What do you do? And that's like all I had, people, and it's funny. Like, it's funny you mentioned the anecdotal stuff too. Like that doesn't count. And I think I agree with that as well, because that seems to be, I said this on X, the most like solipsistic argument that I see out there for that was like, well, I couldn't do it, so therefore it's bad. And it's like, well, have you considered maybe you did it wrong, that you suck, that you
yeah, right. Like, is there perhaps some bit of information that you were missing when you attempted it?
Yes.
Perhaps, like, let's say.
Yeah, maybe maybe you misunderstood something, like maybe you didn't read your entire rule book. I don't know, but bringing like Appendix A and B to the table really lifted a burden off my shoulders. So
yeah, like I ended up adapting a lot of that for my Pathfinder game, and so I kind of see like the zero prep in the chat there, and that is definitely like that is a like, what is that? I'm a situational proponent, so it's like I've been playing Pathfinder for over a decade. I can do zero prep with Pathfinder. You know what I'm saying? I am not. That is not the case. I'm not doing that with AD&D, which I think that's because I just picked it up maybe a month ago. I'm still sort of learning like the charts and graphs and stuff. So you kind of have to put the work in. It's really an advanced. It's definitely an advanced thing.
Yeah, that's an important thing to specify, and I think I had said this on X as well, and I had a video rolling around in my head a while back, and I think I might have said it in a couple of my videos that like the difference between the kind of game I advocate for and what other people advocate for is like the narrative gamer. He will sit and tell you that oftentimes that his way is the best way and it's the easiest way. And I'm not gonna like lie to you and say that what I'm trying to do is easy, because it's not necessarily easy. It's you have to know your rule book. You have to know where stuff is. You have to really know the game system you're running like the back of your hand, or at least as best as you possibly can, in order to make the zero or low prep game work. So like I'm not gonna lie to you and tell you that like this is the easiest way to do it. It's not. Yeah. There's a lot of front end work that you have to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's what. Oh, go ahead, Vic.
No, like I was gonna agree. Like I can zero prep like 5th edition pretty well. Like I zero prep modules. Like I don't read modules beforehand. I read them as I'm running them basically, and it's fun actually. But like if you give me like if you give me like I don't know like some kind of like free league game or whatever, like I probably wouldn't be able to zero prep that because I have like no idea how anything works. So
yeah. So I think that little detail does like the two camps like do talk past each other as far as that detail, because you got some people are like, you're just telling like brand new players to do this, and it's like, well, no, I'm not. But it's hard to be that pithy when you're like you're trying to be pithy. It's like it's kind of hard to allow for that. So
in this one here, Gary says for prep that when you build your dungeon, build 12 levels of the dungeon. Like he straight up tells you in OD&D, like that's the bare minimum your dungeon needs is 12 levels. So like it's not like I'm against prep.
Yeah.
It's like what I try to explain to people is like zero prep is the goal. It's always what you're like I'm striving for to make my life ultimately easier, because I've read my rule books. I hopefully understand the game well, and so I can kind of go in and just because I know the rule book very well and how all these things interact with each other, I can make stuff on the fly and use tables and all that kind of stuff as easily as possible. But once you figure it out, like I feel like there's no going back. Like you never want to go back to like this hardcore prep in a system that you've mastered. There's
no right, and that's kind of like what part of the book is trying to get train the reader's eyes on like what to look for in a system, because it's like I don't think for a second like if you just like follow everything I say, because there's 150 pages and like some of it is quite verbose, it's not exactly easily referenced around the table, and that's not what I intend the book to be. It's something you read and then you go and you look at your systems, and then like that helps you look at that system and try to like figure out how to use it appropriately. It's supposed to be like a user manual, like how to drive a car. It's like.
Do you mind if I share your table of contents?
Sure. Yeah. Go for it.
People can kind of see here.
Yeah, this is definitely a passion project. I want as many people to see as possible. I'm not trying to, you know, I'm not trying to retire on this book. So.
So yeah, you can see kind of a lot of the topics he's covering in his book here. A lot of good stuff. One thing that jumped out at me was this section here. I didn't get a chance to read all of it, but the skill list as a non-game. That's that is going to that's going to be controversial to some people.
Yep.
And campaigns grow like a muscle. I think that's within this here, within 0E. Gary says something like, the campaign should grow slowly, and you should slowly add stuff to it as you feel comfortable doing stuff. So I think that kind of stuff is sound advice. But you got a lot of stuff in here. I'm looking at part 2 here. There's like a part 1 here as well. So
yes,
in preparation for the campaign, encumbrance and loot. So many people, when I talk about encumbrance on X, they're like, "Oh, I don't use it," and it's like, "Well, you're missing out."
Yeah, no, you're missing out. And I try to really so part 1 is very much more or less like purely instructional. So it's just kind of describing like what I think you should do and how you should do it. Or in like basically how I do it. And I might explain myself a little bit for context, because like some of these injunctions are going to be a little people might kind of just have like a knee-jerk reaction when they read some of the what I say there. So I was like, I try to get them to kind of understand what I'm talking about briefly. And then part 2 is sort of a rhetorical defense of everything I told you to do in part 1. So like I really try to like knuckle down and drag out like why I think you should do like everything I said in part 1. So
like Crossface here says, I threw skills out in 5e and my games were better for it.
Yeah, that's probably true.
So let's talk about that one. Like let's pick a topic in here, and let's give people a taste of kind of what they're going to get out of your book. So
yeah, go ahead and skip to that page, Abby, if you want to.
See where skill is 106. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
So probably up a little more because it's got the other pages there. There it is.
There you go.
Yep. It's a very short section. It's just a couple pages. And what I try to do here is like I try to paint the ways in which a skill list is proper and in ways in which it is not proper. And so, because like if you can't just say like all skill, like you can't just put this like instructions in front of people and tell them like skill lists are bad, and then not, because it's like all their games have them, and it's like they might not have the wherewithal to like throw them out and still have kind of the same game at the end of that. So like I try to be like, well, if you're gonna use skill lists, it really needs to be kind of they need to be properly applied.
Mm-hmm.
You can't just have like every time a character declares an action, roll something on the skill. Like that's like, and you've seen that. That's sort of people just like kind of overcall for skill checks, or they're like slipping on puddles, or breaking their fingers on doorknobs or whatever. And it's insulting to their players. So, and that's kind of what I was trying to kind of like elaborate here. So it's like if you're gonna call for a skill check, you should treat it the same way you do the tables or in any sort of random procedure. And so a skill check is a procedure that you use to determine outcome when it's not immediately it's not immediately clear what would happen. So it's like I basically treat skill checks like morale saves. Like, will they break? Okay. Will they not break? No, a skill check is, does he get it open in time? Does he not get it open in time? Like, pick the lock in time, or does he pick the lock in time? Things like that.
Well, I think with some games too, it's very dependent on what the game is trying to do. So, for instance, Classic Traveler is a very a very skill-based game. So if you were to remove skills from Classic Traveler, like you're not going to have a game. Classic Traveler is like you're leveling up your character in character creation, and then they're just in a giant dead level for the rest of the game. Your character has to go to school for 4 years to advance any skill. It's brutal. I love it though.
I sometimes roll characters up just for fun. Like I haven't played a Traveler game. I just roll the characters.
The character creation is a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's great. Neat little solo game.
But you so if you remove skills from that, like you're going to be left with a non-game. But something like D&D, the rules themselves and a lot of the mechanics within them, like force open a door on a X and 6. You have this percentage chance based on your strength of like bending bars and lifting gates and stuff like that. Like that kind of stuff is like already pre-built into it, and it's focused towards what D&D is trying to get you to do, which is like war game and exploration,
Right.
And so I kind of feel like, look, what Crossface was saying, if you remove skills from 5e, is that like it's a game where putting skills over the top is, in my opinion, oftentimes kind of redundant and unnecessary, and it leads to just I think that can kind of lead to rolling for everything, I guess.
Yeah. Or even like obviously that's the case. I don't know any claims I make as to like the problems of modern tables. Just go to r/RPG horror stories and scroll. It's like, it's not, if you really want to like you see what's going on out there in the wild, okay, and get back to me. There's YouTube channels that do very, very well just like kind of discussing these like nightmare scenarios.
Crafty says leave skills and skill-based games. Yeah, I feel like level-based games and skill-based games are they're striving towards two different goals. I feel like skill-based games like Traveler are very gritty and like realistic. That's why Call of Cthulhu, for instance, is a skill-based game, because it's you're this squishy little human against these eldritch horrors. So having all these different skills is I think more appropriate than I am trying to feel like Conan the Barbarian or Fafhrd or the Grey Mouser or something like that, going through this dungeon, killing stuff and getting treasure and getting away by the skin of my teeth.
I think that applies to specific skills though, and you kind of touched on that a little bit in the book. I think like one big problem I always have with skill systems is that you get to be competent in like a small handful of skills, and then you suck in the rest because you don't have the points to spend or whatever. So it's like, hey, I want to make like a badass spy, so I'm gonna give myself like martial arts skills and like pistol skills. Oh shit, I ran out of points to notice surveillance. Well, I'm not much of a spy now. So what I kind of like prefer these days is kind of more like background skills. So it's like you pick your background. You're a spy, okay? I get to roll 2d6 plus a bonus to all spy related things per referee's discretion, obviously. So it's like, hey, I want to notice if somebody's like following me. Like, okay, roll. I want to like do martial arts. Okay, roll. So like, and I think that still works with D&D, because in D&D you can be like, well, my fighter, like he was like a blacksmith. So I get to roll blacksmithing related things, like stuff like that. So
AD&D does have background skills in the DMG, I believe. So you do have little background skills like that that can be used. It doesn't really tell you how to use them fully, but they're there. So.
The way I've always done them is like, if you've got it and you're like, connect it for me, and then maybe that'll inform like kind of what happens, I guess. Maybe I don't know.
But yeah, I think that's interesting. You mentioned something that you treat skill checks like did you say saving throws or something like that?
Morale. I treat them like morale saves. Yeah,
morale. You said morale saves, but I was kind of thinking about it. Got me thinking, and because I've had this thought in the past, like in old school D&D and 0E, BX, and AD&D, I always kind of felt like looking at the saving throw matrix is like that's almost like a skill list in and of itself. You're walking through the dungeon and you step on a trap, and it's like a spike trap or like an arrow trap or something. Give me like a death ray save to see if you can get out of the way. That to me seems appropriate, because it like I said before, it seems like it's kind of the mechanics in the game, the way the game's designed itself, it's sort of already pre-built into it. So adding another layer of skills over the top, if it's not done properly, can feel redundant or break the game in some respect.
Yeah, and that's kind of what why, like I say, when I talk about them being like morale saves, is that it helps when the outcome is unsure, it helps you decide the outcome.
Mm.
That is basically it. So, in the times that the outcome is short, you shouldn't be rolling, and whether it be positive or negative,
Mhm.
And I think in games on like D&D, you have this like kind of ridiculousnly with the skills, that did, like you said, like gets out of hand, and like what Vic was pointing out too, with like like I want to make my badass spy, and I
Yeah.
can't do that right now of skill points. So yeah, no, I'm very much in the camp of like, well, if you must have a skill list, it has to be with, you really got to treat it a certain way.
Yeah.
So
Has to be very broad in my opinion, so you can like
yes,
use it for different applications.
yeah. So, and there's nothing more heartbreaking than a character who, like, I didn't put ranks in diplomacy, so I don't talk.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, you're not, you've barred yourself from like out of the game,
Yeah.
and like it hurts player, like, I don't know, player engagement, I guess.
Yeah, I think that sometimes skills lead to that. Even skill-based games can lead to that, where they're like, "Well, I don't want to try that because it's not on my it's not good on my sheet,"
Right.
Right. And I think that I don't know. To me, that's like just the wrong way of thinking. Because if you were in real life, and you're about to be mugged by a group of, let's say you're playing a Call of Cthulhu game and you're about to get attacked by a bunch of cultists, and if this was happening in real life, like even if you knew you weren't very good with words, you might still try and like negotiate with these guys, right? Like it just seems,
Yeah.
your life's at stake. You'd still try.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
And heck, you might do it.
Yeah.
Like if it's like back against the wall, you'd be surprised you just like dig down, you pull something out. I don't know.
Making skills a bit more broad also adds a little bit of like player and GM interaction that I enjoy. If you have like very specific skills, it often creates the situations where they roll something before you even ask for it as a DM. It's like, well, obviously the skill fits the situation, so I'm just gonna roll fucking sneak or whatever. But like
Right.
if it's like, a background skill system, I like that interaction. It's like, hey, so I have the spy background. Would that apply in this situation? And then I think about it as a DM. It's like, oh yeah, that would apply because you're trying to do this, and obviously you would have probably learned that in the CIA. So yeah, let's go for it. Like that's what I enjoyed when John and me were playing Scarlet Heroes, because that kind of has like that background skill system. So my character, one of his backgrounds was like bounty hunter. So I was like, hey, I'm a bounty hunter. Would I have any knowledge of like following tracks? And it's like, yeah, that makes sense. So I got like a bonus on following like goblin tracks. And like, I love that stuff. That's fun.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that was yeah.
I wanna touch on probably gonna jump around a bit on topics here, but
Sure.
the creation of the world here. This section here kind of skimmed it too, and we're talking about low prep or zero prep, and like that doesn't mean absolutely no prep. Like you're showing up to game day with absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
What's your view on world building? Like we kind of joke on the Gilded server, especially with Greg from Chronicles of Iris. You see these people on X that have their in their bios like, I'm a world builder and a world weaver.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
it always just annoys me because I feel like some people like the idea of playing and the building a world to play in that they're never going to actually play, and they like that more than actually playing the game. So what kind of advice? You don't have to give it all. So again, I don't want you to give away all your secrets in the book.
Sure.
I want people to buy your book.
I appreciate
But
that.
let's talk about let's talk about world building or the creation of the world here.
Yeah. Yes. Well, like, I guess like I don't come out like with super hard against those like people that want to use like a pre-done setting, but I do think they're kind of cheating themselves out of something that could belong to them and their players. So what I would say, like when you're trying to build a world, like what you see there on the screen, figure out what it is, science fiction, space opera, all that stuff. And so the example I give is basically keyed more toward kind of fantasy like the kind of the traditional sword and sorcery fantasy. We're talking about like lowlands, hills, and mountains. And I kind of give like the Cliff Notes version of uh, like what Gary kind of does in the appendixes. And because that's very kind of detailed, and there's a lot of steps to it. And here I basically took this was very much inspired by Tony Bath's Ancient Wargaming, and like kind of how he kind of conducted his, where he was basically of the opinion that you sort of drill down to, where your nations get their money, get their food, and kind of otherwise supply themselves. And then once you got those figured out, like you're kind of good to go, for as far as like having a kind of a complete nation. And then sort of the more detailed stuff can kind of come later. And yeah, so that's what I kind of do here, and I kind of give like a quick system for generating an area, of whatever size, and you can kind of figure out how like it kind of show you, like the lowlands, the hills, the mountains, the percentage chance of whatever, and you're basically just kind of rolling on a piece of paper, recording it on a piece of paper, and you can kind of figure out what's going on, and then that will let you sort of draw your national boundaries, because national boundaries are almost always going to be built around either kind of natural formations or resources. So,
yeah, if there's like a mountain range there, they're probably gonna, that might be the boundary right there,
right.
We don't go over those mountains.
Yeah, I mean, we're not patrolling over there. That's going to be our wall. So
yeah, I think that's smart. Like, one thing I've told people before, because I was a notorious like over prepper world builder,
yes.
fill up my notebook with all these gods, and like then you start writing about these gods, and like, they do this ritual at this day on the calendar, and it's like all this nonsense that your players are never going to see
or care about,
Yeah. And that's when I sort of realized, like, what are the player facing things? Like, if I'm going to put myself in the shoes of a player, like, what would I want to know is where is it at in the world? Who does it? Like, what is it? Like, who's the most powerful wizard, or sorcerer or magic user, because he might be someone I want to work for, or rob, or work for his rival or something like that, so you can kind of focus on religion, but then I tried to focus like on my games now, like, what is the player facing side of the religion that matters, and I still don't have stuff fleshed out, and it's become a joke at the table where, like, they know I'm making stuff up as I go along, but they don't really mind, because they're contributing too, I think, as players. They've done plenty of things where they've suggested something, and I'm like, you know what, that's actually really brilliant, and that's part of the game world now. So
yeah.
Go ahead. You kind of got to think, like, what would the player characters even know or care about? If they're like, some adventurers who just want to go into the wilderness and like raid some dungeons, they're probably not going to care too much about like the political situation of the kingdom. Just like me, like, if you ask me, like, hey, who's your minister of agriculture? I have no idea right now. Like, I've literally no clue. So like, and I figure, like, characters realistically would be the same way. Like, well, who's the king's advisor? Like, I don't know. I'm just here to like get some gold meat, like, so.
Yeah. I mean, and that's what is it, like, it's not the interest in that sort of thing is not usually equally dispersed among the players. So it's like, I have like, one or two players that are sort of intrigued by that. And it really kind of turns into, when we're in Civilization, like, they might sort of drill down on sort of like the quote unquote lore of the area, whereas like the others are kind of like, okay, I kind of want to go now. Like,
yeah. Well, I think that stuff can be handled behind the scenes then. If you're playing like some crazy wizard who's like a scholar who knows everything, come up with a specific question, ask your GM on Discord or whatever, and he'll tell you out of the game. And then you can look smart in the game when you suddenly mention, oh, hey, the king's advisor, yeah, that's Arnus Goldstone, like whatever. And all the players like, how the fuck does he know that? Like,
No, that's interesting. Yeah, I set up a kind of like kind of a informal wiki, like it was just like a Google Doc, back in the day for my my setting, and that's what like a lot of. And I was basically like, if anybody asked me lore questions, I was like, here's the link to the wiki.
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
so that to your point, that definitely that solved the problem for a lot of those players. They got their fix.
Mhm.
So
Well, I noticed like in my play groups that a lot of the guys are willing to take notes more. Sometimes like one of my players, he takes better notes than I do. Like sometimes I'll ask him like, 6 sessions ago, you guys talked to the seneschal of the king, and what was his name again, and what did he say? And he'll be like, oh, he said blah blah blah, and his name is whatever. And it's like, oh, cool, thanks. I need to add that to my notes because I didn't do a very good job doing that.
oops.
But I realized like when I really allow the players to kind of imprint themselves in the game world a bit, and I take what they're doing seriously and I try and react to it and make their choices matter in the world. Like they take really good notes like that, they're which tells me they're into it. And I don't know, that to me was like, to me that felt as a referee, that felt like winning, that felt like I won, because that's ultimately what you want. Like that's why you have the Invisible Railroad game and all that kind of stuff, because you ultimately want everyone at the table to have fun, and you want to have fun,
Right.
but you always end up, generally speaking, not having fun.
The highlights are highlights for a reason.
Like especially when the players solve things in super imaginative and creative ways, and their real choices they made in the game really matter and make a difference. So like I've talked about it multiple times, but like our play group still talks about how my players started an orcish civil war by like murdering the guard of one tribe and blaming it on the neighboring tribe. And they started this whole civil war because there was like way more orcs in this dungeon than they had the ability to take on. And so they, on their own, they orchestrated this civil war, and we ran with it. Like I just tried to adjudicate it as best I could based on the rules and the situation. And like they just waited outside the dungeon at one point as they slaughtered each other inside, and they just swooped in and cleaned up the wounded and the mess at the end. And it was like, there's the treasure. And I was like, you guys deserve it. That was a very awesome and creative way, the way you guys did it. So
yeah, exactly.
I had a similar thing where like they were, again, this is before kind of the fully open sandbox, but they were on some sort of like diplomatic, or like in a diplomatic attaché to like the monarch of their sort of native land, and I pulled a like Medici assassination and locked them in during the church service and set the building on fire. And I was like, hope you guys make it, and it was very that's that particular session was a highlight because they still talk about that one. But
and when players talk about stuff like that, that's when you have to that's really when you got to look at what the situation was and how it happened, and like what did I do and what did the players do, because there was some magic there, and if I want to, I'm always trying to like replicate that magic that occurred in that situation throughout every game session. And I've always realized when that happens, it's when the players have like they have complete and full autonomy, and they're contributing to that game world, into the lore, into this, just everything about it, and one of my 5e games is like I've talked about this before. I guess my mind was being more illuminated to the concept of the truly open sandbox game with true player agency. There was the main villain that I had set up. They didn't really care about that villain as much. Towards the end of the campaign, they were sort of just going through the motions of, we're going to go kill this guy. Actually, it was a female. It's like this lizard lady. We're going to go kill this like lizard lady queen because we kind of have to, because John wants us to. But I sort of made this side villain that just kind of, I needed a villain at the spot. So he was like this cult leader, and he was like the high priest, knight of this like evil paladin order of like nihilistic void worshippers. And the players, I just made it up on the spot because I needed something for that session. And the players got really attached to that villain, and I realized that he got away in that session, and I'm like, well, I gotta bring this guy back. So I started like weaving him in more as like this side thing.
Yeah.
And the players like loved interacting with that cult and that bad guy far more than anything else that I had railroaded them on. And I realized then, that was when I realized, like, well, that's because that villain arose organically in the game based on what they were doing. And I think whether consciously or subconsciously, the players latched onto that. They understood that. So that was when it clicked for me. Like, I'm tired. I put all this effort into my campaign, and they're sort of going through the motions of all my amazing narrative plot points, and I make something up on the spot, and they love it, and they think it's the best thing ever. There's something to this, I guess. I need to do more of that.
Yeah. It's like they get super attached to like the day laborer Billiam, or whatever his name you kind of just come up with on the fly. I mean, we all have that story. It's ubiquitous. Which is also
goblin means snot.
yeah. I think like I did the same thing with I mean, everybody's got like maybe a dozen of those stories, maybe 24 of those stories, because it keeps happening. So that's why I talk about like iteration. Okay, so there's something there. So there's actually something there, and that's part of like what I'm trying to kind of capture, because it's like there is clearly things you should focus on, and there are things that you should not. As far as like if you want to sort of maximize your play, because I don't think it's outrageous to say an hour of work should get you 4 hours of play. When most people would invert that and be like, 4 hours of work gets you 1 hour of play. And I think that's not sustainable and shouldn't be expected.
And that's how a lot of how games are ran. And I notice, we're talking about this here. One thing I notice with a lot of the D&D influencers, I guess, that really sort of push that the kind of game that maybe we don't care as much for, they don't have, I don't oftentimes hear them talk about stories. There's a few of them that do, but many of them, it's like you don't seem to have this story that's like your group's, it's this mythic lore in your play group, of something that is insane. That happened in your campaign, and you guys talk about it to this day because it was just so amazing or memorable. Like I don't see those that are big proponents of over prepping or world building and world weaving that have that,
When they do have those stories, it's usually them like allowing stuff that's not even like remotely raw, and it's just like nonsense. It's like, oh yeah, my level 1 players like killed like an ancient dragon. It's like, well, how did they do that? And then they go off into like some whole like thing where like, they totally shouldn't have killed the dragon, but the GM basically allowed them to because he thought it was cool. It's like, it just turns into some wool of cool shit basically.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like everybody's just sort of responding to each other like an improv class, and that's kind of what, like, this is not, what we're trying to do here is not that, it's not, and they can sit around and just listen to exposition and stuff, because like these people are actors for the most part. There's some version of actor, so maybe they do actually get something out of the exposition, like how it's delivered and something like that. Like like a chef can appreciate the work of another chef. That's what I'm saying there. So yeah, and it's like, so like then people are very bad at, broadly speaking, projecting. They're bad about projecting like how they feel about something onto other people. So when these actor types kind of come out, they go, oh, well, like this works for me, like this should work for you, because everybody's basically the same. And that's not the case. So like I wrote this book partially for kind of like everybody else.
Brian, real quick, is asking if you have a YouTube channel.
I do not. Like maybe sometime in the future, but as of right now, real life's a little busy. I got enough time for podcast appearances and posting on Twitter. So, or x.com.
Yeah, I just still call it Twitter too.
I get that. Let's talk about something also controversial. Like people are still flipping out about this.
Yes.
Let's talk about time.
Yes.
Let's talk about strict time records.
You can't see it, but I'm rubbing my hands together.
So you got the 1-to-1 time in here, one actual day,
Sure do.
one game day.
Mhm.
Just a different way, just really a different way of phrasing than at the back of what is this one here? Book 3 of 0E, 1 week of actual time equals 1 week of game time. People like to sit and let me see I can get my camera on it. Trust me, it's there. Page 36 of book 3.
Yeah, go buy it.
So dungeon expedition equals 1 week, wilderness adventure equals 1 move equals 1 day, and 1 week of actual time equals 1 week of game time. Page 36 of book 3, the underworld and wilderness adventures. 0E, 3 LBBs.
Yeah.
So John,
Yeah.
Gary didn't play that way.
That's cool. Good for Gary. I do. I play that way. So I like in that way, perhaps I'm what I've written has lines up with my reality.
Yeah.
So make of that what you will.
I think what people don't seem to understand is like this is what's up, Red Caps? This is a different kind of game than I think what a lot of people are used to. It's really good for, in my opinion, this is just my opinion, it's really good for lots of play groups, lots of players playing in the same shared campaign world. And if you're just, but I do think there's a benefit if you're running a quote unquote like conventional or traditional campaign. I think there's still something to it that could be a lot of fun for players, even if you don't have what 0E says in the here book 1, where it tells you that number of players, at least 1 referee, and from 4 to 50 players can be handled. So if you're not running a game like that, like sure, you don't maybe need it, but you can still get it's still going to potentially be beneficial, and it could still potentially be fun. But yeah, this argument that like Gary didn't play this way, so therefore it's bad and wrong. It's like, well, I don't really care. I'm interested what it says, what kind of game is produced by playing this game. So,
yeah. No, right. And that's kind of like I don't even like bother to respond or even like kind of engage if I see that's like if that argument is being like bandied about, because it's usually at the end of a conversation, not at the beginning. It's like basically that's what you say, when you're sort of like out of options. Well, you didn't play that way. I'm like, okay, well that's cool. Like that's what I say. Like I do. So
yeah.
Now what?
Yeah.
You can't gaslight me to tell me my way doesn't work, because it does. I'm telling you, it does.
I don't like that.
Go ahead, Vic.
No, I was gonna say like I don't like that argument either, because I bought the book and I want to play with the rules that are in the book. I don't care what Gary did at his kitchen table in 1987. I wasn't there. Like, so why would I care like how he played? I want to play what he wrote down, because that's what I paid $40 for.
Yeah, no, right.
Crafty says the basic expert, don't forget the Living Greyhawk in 3E had 1 week equals 1 adventure. People did play this way. So, there was some form. Yeah. Lots of games of the era, Crossface, I don't know if he's still in the chat. He was mentioning how, what was it? It was like Swords and Chivalry or Spells and Chivalry. I don't remember the name of the game. It was a game of the era in the 70s that had it mentions like, oh, like this isn't like D&D where it uses 1-to-1 time. It uses some other metric, but it still aligns in some ratio way to the real world.
I remember that. I think it was like a day, or it was like a week is like a season or something.
Something like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
You have I know like RuneQuest had a different ratio. Chivalry and Sorcery. Crossface is still here. Thank you. Chivalry and Sorcery is the game. RuneQuest has a different one. Pendragon has a different ratio of time. Like, it's clear in this era that strict timekeeping is important. And regardless of whether Gary played that way or not, or whether this is the way we played, everyone ignored that rule. Like, I don't care. There's this game, D&D in particular, is a game of resource management. Time is a resource. And so I think that
Right.
when you force time to be an actual resource to your players, really interesting stuff can happen. So like let's maybe like elaborate on that, because Gary says that you can't have a meaningful campaign without strict time records being kept. And
Yes.
like what he did say that. And I think there's an argument to be made that Gary did play with one-to-one time, at least during the 0E days early on, and probably into AD&D. Otherwise, why would he write about it in this book?
Yeah. Well, either that or all his friends did.
Yeah.
It's not.
So like what are the benefits of like strict timekeeping? Like why bother? It seems like a lot of work, man. Like I gotta like keep track of all this stuff. Come on.
Well, it's like you heard this this little term that gets kind of overused into oblivion, but verisimilitude. If your players do complain about this, like you can go on kind of like the influencer channels, and they all talk about how like, oh yeah, we leveled up, we got like 12 levels, and we compiled the time, and it was like a month in game.
Yeah.
Or whatever. And they'll all talk about it, and they all talk about it negatively. So this stuff like they don't like it either, is my point. So clearly there's something going on with time records that needs to be you do kind of have to have something. So I don't really harp on the old school guys a lot because they don't do one-to-one time, but from what I can tell, a lot of them do keep strict time records in that way. So like my point is like I'm kind of sidestepping the issue entirely, and I'm saying that one-to-one time is the easiest thing to iterate, which is why I push it. So because once you sort of get past like all the nuts and bolts, all you're doing is looking at a calendar. Time ticks forward no matter what, and that's kind of why I push it so hard, is because it's time passes the same for everybody around the table, you and them. It's one day at a time, and it doesn't really require, like, you don't have to keep like a spreadsheet of like, okay, we had like this many sessions, or like whatever your system for tracking time is. Like you don't have to keep tallies or anything. That you are just looking at the time, and like that actually, there is actually a lot of power in sort of like the just sort of like how easy it is to implement. Now, once you sort of get into and it's like once you get into it, so what is the benefit? Like even when you're not the benefit is like all those like those horror stories complaining about like the loner edgelord who wants to like do cool loner edgelord stuff. Well, he can actually in the downtime. He's like, you've safely relegated, you've let him get it out of his system around the table by taking him away from the table and letting him do it in your Discord channel instead.
Now he's not disrupting the group as much,
No, and he gets what he gets. He gets what he wants, and then when he comes around the table, he's ready to do teamwork because like there might be something he runs into solo that he cannot handle. He needs a team now, and that's the session. So, and that's kind of what like why I that's the example. But I mean, you have a lot of this stuff. You have like you have the person that wants to like investigate the lore, or they want to get involved in political intrigues. And they not like you never have that moment where that person is taking up time around the table because they feel they have gotten their time with you one-on-one via text message, email, Discord, Guilded, wherever you're at, So that's what I'm saying. Like that's like it as far as implementation goes, it's the easiest. You don't have to it is not table specific. The calendar is the same for all tables, which is also why it's so good about it. So yeah, and you can start combining tables, which is also something I'm concerned about too, is like networking. I think networking is very, very good for people. So
yeah, on the Guilded server, I've been doing an experiment. We're playing 0E. We're all solo gaming 0E in the same map using one time. And it's been kind of fun. So like, it's kind of like on this honor system. Like if you're going to cheat, you're really only cheating yourself.
Right.
But we're having fun. Like everyone has their own little adventuring party. Like all I did was I built a little map that was like 5 mile hexes as the recommendation of 0E. And I was like, here's the map, guys. And I put like a bunch, just like a random dungeons all over the place, some cities, some It's like, this is where the elves live. This is like a dwarven stronghold. I don't know anything about these places. Like, I just have names and locations on a map. And some of them don't even have names. It's like, here's a location, and I just put unknown. I don't know what it is. And so I put it out there, and I'm like, I'm starting in Bleakburn. You know, I'm going to adventure in Bleakburn, and I'm going to head out, and, you know, my group has its own little adventure where they're like trying to seek what happened to this missing Lord Mordre, and his manor has been burned down, and there's a dungeon beneath his manor, and like, what's in there? And so my group is exploring that, but someone else is exploring, like, from Bleakburn. They're going to like a different dungeon, and they're exploring, and we're all using one time. We're using a calendar on Gilded. So like, if my guys go out for a week, like I do my little solo game session for like 30-40 minutes, and then I mark off on the calendar, like, oh, they're a week out. So like in 1 week, I can play them again. They'll just be getting back into town, you know, for me to use again. And everyone else is using the calendar in the same way. So we all mark off on the shared calendar when our characters become unlocked. And it's been a lot of fun. And there's like tons of stuff being generated. And the beautiful thing about it is that, like, all the stuff that we're generating as a group, I could easily take everything, because like they're pretty much generating notes for me, and we're generating notes for each other. I could take this to a different play group and still run them on one time, have them in the same world as all these solo gamers, you know, and you know, you really see sort of the power of it. And you're right. It sounds daunting. It sounds hard, but you do have, it's easy. Like real life is moving forward for you and keeping track of time for you. So you don't have to think about it very much.
Nearly all of your messages are time stamped automatically when they're sent. You know, it's like, what am I recording? You know, it's done for me. Everything about it is done for me. The one time is much more doable now by the broadest number of tables than it would definitely have been at the time that the rule was come up with. You know, which would have been conducted via letter or phone call, which I believe phone calls were at one point involved in these sorts of things.
Yeah, watching Secrets of Blackmoor, I remember a line somewhere where like people would call up Arneson and be like, I want to do blah 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 blah, and they'd just like call him at random times on his phone. So,
yes, that's what I was thinking of. Yes, exactly. So,
but yeah, it's been fun. Like the things that are being generated in this like solo experiment, it's funny. It's like solo multiplayer. It's really bizarre, but it's working. It's really it's fun. So we're all having a good time.
It's crazy, and it's really sort of like I have two smaller groups that don't really interact. They're technically in the campaign at the same time, but they're just on different sides of the planet. You're not like it for them. It's just they have kind of all the space they need to like kind of do whatever they want, and I haven't really needed it for like a big multiplayer thing, you know, like, because I know that gets bandied about like, well, I don't have 20 players, so I don't really need it. And it's like, well, no, even if you only got like 4, there's still something to that. Like now they just have a lot of time to be able to sort of input their actions, and they can kind of be maybe a little more specific, or they could be a little more involved. Really what it does is it just makes you so their players do your session notes for you, and then they send them to you, and that they feel like they're playing, like they thank you for the privilege of writing your next session for you, and that's what I think what I think is that is the strongest aspect of 1-to-1 time is the players writing your session notes for you. So
see you, R-dubs.
Take it easy, R-dubs. But like, what was I going to say? I'm gonna think about that one for a second. Let me. Go ahead.
Worries. So Chris Lundgren, welcome, dude. I always love seeing you in the chat. He's asking some questions here. He's like, so is the Living Campaign fantasy neutral setting? Sorry for my ignorance, just joining the topic. No worries. And then you kind of seem like you're starting to get it. So more of a sandbox Greyhawk campaign, basically. More just like general advice, like on how to run a campaign that's gonna like sustain itself, is what John has done. How a game that you will not get burnt out, and hopefully and your players won't get burnt out on. So
a lot of it as far as like the setting, it's like I use a lot of fantasy examples, just because it's, I think, the most kind of accessible for the most people. But I don't see why you couldn't use one-to-one time with spaceships, or some kind, or like not just one-to-one time, but even a lot of the other stuff, like generating planets in the same way that you might generate like hexes or something like that. Like I do, like you might have to massage it a little bit, like, but I think a lot of the advice is somewhat genre neutral.
I've been playing a lot of Classic Traveler, trying to. I'm hoping to get the Classic Traveler campaign back on its feet. We were using one time, and my thinking behind it was like with Traveler, that is that like jumps take like 2 weeks, if I remember correctly. So you have like 2 weeks there where like if they they're in hyperspace, they're jumping between star systems. So you have a lot of you have a lot of time there where like they could switch to different characters or something like that. We haven't really had that yet, because we got like a few sessions in, and then I got horribly sick, so I wasn't able to DM or referee the Traveler game anymore. But Classic Traveler, those three little LBBs, three LBBs of that are pretty much in line with the same thinking, I feel, and mentality as 0E and later AD&D, where it comes out of that war game culture. GDW designed war games before they designed RPGs. So
I love the Traveler rulebook. I've never played it, but I've read that. I read it cover to cover.
Easy game to solo game too. So
yeah, No, so I got to watch your videos on that, because I'm definitely intrigued. So it's hard to get a picture of what a Traveler campaign looks like from the rulebook. So, but or at least I struggled with it. But yeah, I mean, the thing about the time thing is that one-to-one has unfortunately taken on the stink of friend enemy. So like people like when you say one-to-one, there's like some people just instinctively kind of lump you in, or they just sort of just reject you out of hand. Like it actually has like a what is, like there's as insane as it is to say out loud, there's a one-to-one time has taken on a political valence.
It kind of became like a culture war thing almost in our little subsect of like the hobby.
And it really shouldn't, because it's in the rule book, and it
but people get mad at certain personalities, and then everything that those personalities say, it's like, well, fuck them, and that means that's bad. What they like means it's bad because they're bad.
Right. That's about all the thought that goes into it. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
it's very, very smooth brain mentality.
Yeah.
I was trying to explain one-to-one time to someone. I busted out my book, and because Gary, the way he writes, in this, like, what was it, book 3? I think it says he says something like it's a suggestion. It is suggested that a record of each player be kept, blah, blah, blah. And so this person was like, well, it's suggested. And I'm like, okay, well, let's look at book 1. And you got like recommended equipment. So this is just a suggestion, right? Dungeons and Dragons, you have it. Oh, it's only suggested that you have this book. Dice. It's only suggested if you need dice.
Right.
Chainmail.
Well, you joke, but people do kind of think that these days, though.
Yeah.
Like, you don't need Dungeons and Dragons to play Dungeons and Dragons. Just have like a little role-playing session with your friends in the woods while you're walking in the woods. Like, okay, and that's Dungeons and Dragons too. You can't tell me otherwise. Okay.
And it was annoying, but it was like, look, man, like, I'm not like the people you think I am. I'm trying to be cool with you and chill and like and explain this concept to you without being an asshat to you. And you're going to be an asshat to me. Like, okay, I see you're not very smart, but you interact with a lot of people like that just have this vitriolic response to strict time records for some reason. It's funny.
Yeah, it's really, really weird. And like, I don't know, I don't particularly get it. I don't know. I'm also not like what is it? I'm my forward facing, like on X, it's like I try to be like patient with people and things like that. I stand by what I say, but I don't exactly like go out of my way to like pick fights on the
Sure.
internet.
It's a waste of
Not
time.
no, it's a waste of time. I just, like I just kind of want to talk about the games and stuff. Like that's kind of what I'm after here. But I'm also not really like part of the get along game. Like as far as like, why can't we all just be friends? Like, no, I think like it's okay. Like some people want to go on the internet and argue. Like that's actually like fine. I have no problem with that.
Sure. Yeah.
And because I mean the topics are usually has to do with rule sets of games. So like I'm not saying like I don't think anybody's really living or dying by this. So I think the stakes are fairly low. I think the conversation is definitely interesting and worth having because it's part of a what is it? Like it's like a social like phenomenon, but like otherwise like I don't know. Like it doesn't really bug me that much either way.
Yeah, I don't care. I'm interested in interesting ideas.
Yeah.
And
yes.
Someone who I absolutely despise might have an interesting idea, but like if it's an interesting idea, I'm gonna acknowledge it as an interesting idea. you know? And props to that person or group of people or whoever, even if I don't like them, for having that interesting idea.
Right. So
like I've never had calls to use one-on-one time because of the type of games I'm currently running. Like I run modules and stuff, and like adding one-on-one time to that is kind of awkward when you're like in the middle of like a mega dungeon.
Sure.
But I have nothing against it just because some people were jerks on Twitter for a while. Like, that's just silly.
Yeah, it's like these don't relate, honestly, at the end of the day. Yeah. So that's funny. But yeah, no, I was like I generally, if it's something like, oh well, like your type of game you're playing, like I'm not exactly gonna sit here and tell you, Victor, that your games are bad.
Yeah. I mean they are, but
but I mean, like so I'm really more interested. I'm more interested in trying to get a viable alternative method to people that sort of need it. And if you have a table that is getting like everybody shows up and everybody's on time, you're not having like dropouts or whatever, then you don't really like need a ton of advice. It sounds like whatever you're doing is working for you. But I mean, like broadly speaking, tables are sort of falling apart all the time. So like that's what I'm trying to speak to.
Yeah, and Crossface says here, the problem is that if someone sees a rule that has been ignored for years and points it out, they almost get thrown under the bus for even talking about it. And I've experienced that too with some stuff, although, I was kind of surprised, I did that thread yesterday, I think, on fighting men in 0E and how awesome they are and how that's kind of been lost. And only a few people kind of came at me with like a bit of pushback, but most people are like, oh, I didn't know that. That's cool. So, I don't know, maybe the tides are changing. I don't know.
I don't know. Like
maybe people don't have a hill to die on with that topic either, though. So I don't know.
Well, you also broke it down very well. So a lot of people they're anti something, but they're not actually really all that familiar with it. So when somebody breaks it down actually intelligently and actually like very mechanically, it's like, well, I actually don't really know anything about this, so I can't argue against it in my usual way.
Yeah,
that makes sense. I don't know.
No, yes, and that's exactly why. Like, I think I have had a pretty good reception of the book so far, even from people that like maybe had. Maybe would have kind of reacted emotionally to a suggestion of one-on-one time. Because I try to take their considerations, like the things that keep popping up, I do try to address those in ways that could be perceived as understanding. So
I want to answer, we start a comment here. I want to answer just this one real quick.
Sure.
Doesn't really have to do with your book, but I think it's an interesting question nonetheless. This is the basic expert and the rest of the panel. In the last few months, I've seen solo play get talked about more and more than I have in recent years. What do you think has been the main driver of this? I don't want to be super arrogant, but maybe me and a few others. John Mollison, a lot of us really have been pushing solo gaming for a while, and I think it's starting to catch on. So
John Mollison was sort of my gateway into kind of like tactile, tangible ways of sort of understanding the game. So
I tried it because of John. He was like, extolling its virtues, and I was like, I'll give it a shot. So I was like running a solo game using, I think it was Scarlet Heroes, and like I enjoy like running on the oracles. I enjoy like the hex crawling and like having like the random encounters. But then it's like, oh, you find the dungeon. No, generate the dungeon. I'm just sitting there, it's like, I wonder what's going on Twitter right now. I don't know. I just get lazy and I don't want to like sit there and just roll up a whole ass dungeon. So I don't know.
Yeah,
Well,
go ahead.
the thing though is like you could still just keep, if you enjoy the wilderness adventure. Like,
Yeah.
there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
You could solo game that wilderness adventure. So
yeah.
Yeah. No. Yeah. Like most of my solo, like, so I do kind of fiddle around with solo play, but that's usually a function of my downtime. So possibly controversially, I don't disbar the possibility of dungeons in my downtime. I allow players to try to tackle it, but I make it aware, like, so it's basically they're sort of involved in a narrative sense. I kind of describe what happens, but that's where I get my solo play scenarios from, is from those players that I actually do want to risk it. Because I just use their character sheets for that. They're explicitly told that it is sort of like, I will be running this solo, So if you have a problem with that, don't do it, but it's on the table.
That's cool.
I prefer one-on-one play over solo. I prefer like one GM, one player. Like I did that for years back in the day, using like twice stat and stuff like that. And I love that stuff. I love having just one character be like Jason Bourne like type guy, and I'm just like, like, oh yeah, you're like being chased by the CIA. Let's see how you fare.
Oh, right.
That's kind of my jam over solo play a bit more, but yeah.
Yeah, Scarlet Heroes is a perfect game for that. So
yeah,
Yeah,
we should do more live plays of Scarlet Heroes, just like just definitely. The two of us. But one thing here too, in your book that I am glad you touch on is this idea of theater of the mind, and I'm curious for you, what do you for your Pathfinder game? Do you use theater of the mind, or is that like virtual tabletop miniature stuff? Do you use theater of mind for AD&D? I feel like AD&D actually works really well for
it does work
really
mind. Well.
Yeah.
So theater of the mind, I actually do use theater of the mind in kind of both games. It works better in AD&D. Most of this advice works better in AD&D. Like it takes some work on your part if you want to try to like apply it. Kind of like figure out, like, it's the work comes from you having to figure out how it applies. Because a lot of this stuff is sort of just baked in to some of these earlier systems. So it's just sort of like kind of immediately recognizable about how it works. But as far as that goes with theater of the mind, we do play on the online game. We do play, it's a Pathfinder game. We do play on Roll20. But occasionally, like, so because I do sort of like a zero prep for that game, like most of my Roll20 maps are either like drawn on the spot, very quickly, and I get them out, or otherwise, sorry, I'm taking a look at something on the page. So sometimes you're just like, okay, if it's like a small combat, I'm not going to waste the time of like drawing out like a little bits of terrain or whatever. And so we'll just kind of do theater of the mind over Discord chat or something like that. And we definitely do theater of the mind around the table. But yeah, so does that answer your question?
Yeah, I used to be hardcore miniatures guy. Like I still have all my this there's a hutch over here that has all my miniatures and terrain and stuff in it.
Yeah,
and I used to bust that out, and I realized like just over this last year, especially like living here in Idaho, and sometimes the weather's not super great, so I got to drive to someone's house, and it's they can't meet at mine for some reason, or blah blah blah. Or I just really got sick of like lugging around boxes of minis and terrain, and the time it takes to set it up at the table. It just, minis and terrain for me did not mix well for a low to zero prep game.
Yeah.
Because sometimes they encounter something I don't have a mini for, or they encounter a situation like that's going to take a lot of work to set up or even draw like on a dry erase map.
Yeah.
So for me, it's like, we're playing in my in-person game, we're playing Castles and Crusades, which I like. And, there was one point where I was just like, look, guys, like, I just want to show up to game night and I just want to bring the Castle Keeper's Guide, the Monsters and Treasures book, and the Player's Handbook. Like I just want to bring those 3 books, my notebook, and some pencils and graph paper. Like that's all I want to show up with. And so we started playing that way with just Theater of the Mind for them, and they were really open to it. And some of them had played Theater of the Mind before in the past, so they were okay with it. And like I just don't care to go back to miniatures, even though I have a lot of miniatures. Like I just don't care to go back to it.
Yeah,
personally.
Yeah, we what is it? Like sometimes it's like I have like more like visually oriented players where they do like to kind of see like the situation. And then some like don't care either way. But I mean sometimes like it's the like the table props, like setting up all your table props for like what may be a one-off encounter, it's just not worth it. In by my estimation. And we still use, even in Theater of the Mind stuff situations, we use miniatures, and all it is they're organized in like the marching order, like on the table. You know, it's like, well, we'll have that. We have a guy, he like he does like the 3D, he does a lot of 3D printing. It's like a hobby. He's like really put a lot of like time and money into it. And so he's whenever somebody makes a new character, and he'll just print and paint it for them. And he'll have it like, you know, by the time we get to that session, and it's like a fun thing for him to do. So yeah, so we still got all the minis, but yeah, like they don't see as much use as they used to, which is fine, because I mean I think we've gotten kind of better at the game.
You mentioned like tactical granularity in there, like that's why I like minis, because I run a lot of like modern team stuff, you know, that's the shit I write to. But so it's like, yeah, you're like a special forces team in a gunfight. I want to see like where the cover is, what the angles are, like, you know, is there like a window where like a machine gunner or a sniper is and stuff. So I actually like to see that stuff. If you kind of Theater of the Mind that, you do lose a lot of like, you know, tactical considerations. It turns more into like, you know, kind of like an action scene from a book, which is also fun for like, you know, smaller like stuff, like, oh, you're being like ambushed by a couple dudes, sure. But like, you know, if you're having a full like Battle of Fallujah like type situation, then I prefer having like a battle map and tokens. But I also only play online, so that stuff is very easy to set up. I just like look for a cool map on Google, I put it in Roll20 or Foundry or whatever I'm using. I make some tokens, and yeah, you're good to go. So
Devil's Theater says, "Stop the presses. Vic likes modern stuff."
Yeah, well, you know, some people might not know. A fair few.
Yeah, well, you know, I mean, to your point, like if I'm firing up XCOM and it's a text adventure, like that's not exactly what I've signed up for.
No, exactly.
You know, there's a reason XCOM is widely beloved. So
I do think that like Theater of the Mind does work better for these older games though. You know, if you're playing something like even 5e, which so many people tout as like this is the easiest version of the game that's ever been created, I disagree with that, but I think first or 0e or probably any TSR edition is probably easier, but you know, even in 0e, like Gary talks about how miniatures aren't required, but if you want to have them for like a spectacular battle, you know, you know, they finally make it to the Lich's throne room, and him and his minions are there, and they're prepared for battle, and the players are there, and they have their hirelings and retainers with them, you know, and there's going to be this huge battle inside the Lich's throne room. Like, okay, I might throw down some terrain and some miniatures just for the fun of it, because like this is a special situation. You're walking down the hallway and you run into 4 zombies. Like, I don't care. We'll play that out in Theater of the Mind.
Sure. Yeah.
Let's go back up here to your table of contents. Is there like a section of your book that you feel you want to talk about that is, you know, you're particularly proud of and you really want people to take a look at, you know?
Well, I mean, not to be full of myself, but I'm pretty proud of the whole thing. Definitely the massed warfare sections. I have 2 on page 64, and then another one on 138. It's toward the end of the book. And because I really tried to kind of get like a broad strokes way of sort of like how you could kind of like scale up normal combat into a like where you can have like armies clash and it be like kind of meaningful and interesting to the players, and not just sort of be like background dressing with mannequins, is the way I would describe it, as the way it's conventionally run. So
Yeah, because when I was running 5e games and the players would find themselves in this big epic battle, it was sort of like, well, here's a few enemies for you to fight, and then the rest of the battle is sort of like dressing around you, and then as you move around from the battle, like here's a few more guys for you to fight, and this, and that's how you're right. I think that's how a lot of people run a lot of mass combats. There's no, it's very narrative. So like what the players are doing in that battle are not exactly. It's not really affecting the battle as a whole. Like there's no way for you to judge if what they're doing really is actually turning the tides of the battle. In many instances,
I kind of did come up with a system for that, where like I roll the two sides against each other, and then if the players accomplish something, they basically like their side got like a bonus to the roll. But it was like very rough and simple. But yeah, like that's kind of how I solved that.
That's better than nothing. But
yeah. Well, I mean, I think like I don't know. Did you guys ever play like Dragon Age Origins? Remember the beginning of that game? So at the beginning of that game, for those that don't know, it's there is like a big battle, kind of in like the prologue section, I guess, and it is a it's all going on in the background, and then your character and your party has like a series of objectives that they sort of hit, and then the battle progresses as you hit the objectives. And I think that is like a perfect encapsulation of like what the way people typically tend to run these games. And again, that's sort of, like you said, narrative, where the DM is sort of dictating the flow. Like when I run my games in this style, like kind of a scaled up style, and they were defending the town from like this massive like orc incursion, and like the heroes basically had like a last stand at the front gate. And this wasn't it developed like that because there's a couple bad rolls and a spell went off and like killed all their soldiers, and so the heroes had to like kind of hold the gate themselves, keep them from flooding into the town. And it was and they basically held out to where until like the wizard was able to kind of get up above and start raining fireballs. It was like, so they had to like respond to these sort of things like tactically. And it, and the narrative sort of built itself out of the actual things that happened on the ground. Like there was no objectives. It was basically like defeat the orcs. That was the objective I presented to them, and however you decide to do that, that's up to you. Or die, that's also on the table.
Yeah.
And like I think one thing is you're talking about scale here, 1 to 10 scale. Chainmail uses 1 to 20, if I remember correctly. My brain's fried. I've just been like,
some people talking about it. I've read Chainmail. Like, yeah.
I'm like deep dive into 0E and Chainmail stuff right now, personally. So like that's just where my headspace is. But we were talking on Twitter. I think Jeffro was in the comments or something like that, and Crossface, and they were talking about like scale mixing. So for instance, like your hero character is maybe on a 1-to-1 scale, but there's other miniatures on the battle that are like 1 to 10 or 1 to 20. And such concepts were common. They noted during a lot of that, and like that is sort of something that people don't understand now. This idea of like this miniature represents 1, but this one represents 10. Because like the fighting capability of a hero in Chainmail and in 0E is important. That was kind of what my fighting man thread was about. Because they get to that point really quickly, faster than the other 2 classes. So, and it's obvious, like when you look at old school D&D in particular, like at AD&D or 0E, where you see the number of appearing and you have like 300 orcs appear, and it's clearly like this war band that's kind of traveling through the wilderness, and it's your players can either hide from it or it's kind of clear when you're doing these sort of encounters, like in my mind, like what kind of encounters are supposed to happen, right? It's not like I feel like a lot of people kind of look at those numbers in the older TSR editions and they're like, oh, I'm just going to ignore that. You don't run into 300 orcs, you run into 10, you know. So
Well, it's because
Yeah.
of the conception that you're always every encounter is supposed to be combat. It's so people get mad. It's like why is there like a dragon on like this encounter table? I'm like level 1. It's like, well, it doesn't mean that the dragon suddenly disappears 10 foot in front of you and eats you. Maybe you see it like flying a mile overhead towards its lair. Now you know there's a dragon in the area and he might have a lair that you might seek when you're a bit higher level. Like
Yeah.
there's like lots of ways you can handle that shit.
Yeah, I mean, like, yeah, right. It's because I mean, especially like in wilderness, like, a lot of the wilderness rules, like things are very, very far away when
Yeah.
they appear. So,
Yeah.
why would they even see you right away? My big thing about the scaling is basically it's the same game as the game they've already been playing. So it's not an extra system. It's not some you're not adding rules. You're not smuggling in like a lower resolution game into this game that they all agreed to play. So like they understand the actions their characters normally be able to take, and you just times it by 10, and the game remains the same. Like the underlying, it just becomes like instead of being a skirmish like game, a tactical skirmish game, it becomes sort of a mass combat game. It becomes a war game again. So it's just a matter of scale. Like that's like not to boil it down to a single variable, but I'm boiling it down to a single variable. It's a scale issue.
And you looks like you provide. I don't want to give away too much because I want people to buy your book. But
Sure,
you give some essentially rules here. For doing mass combat, and I think that is super useful and helpful, because I think that like mass combat for a lot of people right now in the hobby, they like right now in the hobby. I think because in the hobby wasn't always like this, because these books say like rules for fantastic medieval war game campaigns playable with paper and pencil and miniature figures.
Yeah.
So like it wasn't always this separate thing. It was a slightly different thing, a different take on it. But we kind of see now like tabletop role playing games are over here and war games are over here, and the two don't mix. And it's like, well, no, that's not always the case. And actually we're kind of missing out on our tables and we don't mix these things.
Yeah.
And so I feel like for a lot of people, they see mass combat as sort of this like mystical thing that they don't want to touch because they're scared, of how to. It feels alien and different to them. But like you said, it kind of scales. Like they shouldn't be afraid. It's not like it's not like it drastically changes the game in a huge way.
No, it needs to be. It needs to be handled. I mean, like every campaign I've ever run, of which I used to when I was like the 2009 2010 era, like I was sort of an early person, like kind of doing kind of charging as a DM. I ran games at a local comic book shop. I got a small fee basically from the players that participated on a weekly basis, and I was a very early adopter on that because pretty much that was unheard of at the time, and at least in my area. And like that was, and it happened. So I ran a bunch of campaigns, both for my friends personally, and both for like my what I would say clients or customers or whatever at the comic book shop. And at some point, I've given them not long enough time scale, warfare becomes an issue. Even in like a narrative game, they just sort of seem to gravitate toward it, or maybe that's a me thing. Maybe I gravitate toward it. I don't know. But like even on the sandbox, when I started turning more sandbox, it turned into they're trying to lead armies, and I would basically have to respond to that. And I was never satisfied with the outcome of each time I attempted it. So it turned into where I would, like, one of my buddies, like he's been in a few of my campaigns up until now, and I told him, I said, like, I remember, like, before I kind of came into all this, I was like, I'm going to figure out a way to make mass combat fun. And he told me, good luck. I don't see how you could do it. Like he just, like, it just didn't, he just didn't see how it was possible.
And it's funny because it's like, this wasn't uncommon 30, 35, 40 years ago. This was entirely possible, and the games were designed to handle that.
Yeah.
We sort of, it's one of those things where it's sort of become like lost. It's not really lost knowledge because it's in books that we have access to read, but it's like it is lost because no one wants to look at it and no one wants to try it and no one wants to really bother with it.
I think it was part of the cultural shift from kind of like the war game roots and more towards like, you know, the second edition, like Dragonlance, like where people want to be like, you know, the small group of heroes going over the mountains and going to, you know, Moria, like, and all that stuff. And they don't want to be Aragorn leading, you know, the army.
Yeah, they don't want to be hanging out in the Black Gate with the, you know.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I mean, that's part of the same story and the same.
Yeah,
characters,
exactly. So
you know, like,
Well, and people. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, go for it. Go for it.
People get, so the thing when they say like, well, you know, if it was so great, why did it get dropped? And what you have like, and any like understanding like kind of that history a little bit is like at some point, like, you know, Dungeons and Dragons turned viral, you know, but like it had a huge influx of people from outside of war games culture because it caught fire. It basically escaped its Twitter sphere and ended up in other Twitter spheres where, you know, and it broke. It was a meme. Like basically, Dungeons and Dragons was a meme that broke containment. And so you had all these people that basically came in and they had like kind of their idea of how to run the game. And so these things got dropped, not because like their ideas were the best, but because it was like, you know, they didn't come from that culture and a lot of that was assumed, you know. Because I am not a big believer in that the best ideas always win. Sometimes the best ideas lose. Sure. So, you know, and I think if you put it that way, I don't know anybody who would disagree with that. With any sort of like historical literacy.
No, it happens all the time. We live through it right now. We're living through it.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, I'm a firm believer that you know, people might be thinking this is arrogant of me to say, or I have no business saying it, being a young whippersnapper. You know, I wasn't even a twinkle in my father's eye when some of these people were starting to play their first D&D games with the 3 LBBs. Sure. But like, I'm a firm believer that in, you know, the moment that the 3 LBBs hit the market, like they were immediately misunderstood by people, you know, immediately. It was like, it's because that's when it caught fire. You know, that's when it became viral initially, was when that little white box came out, or the wood paneled one, and people took it. And that's how we get this idea where people, and it bothers me now because I've actually taken the time to read the 3 LBBs and I've taken the time to read Chainmail, and people are like, oh, well, you know, the 3 LBBs white box is like this like incomplete game. It's a mess. You can't even play it. And it entirely relies on GM fiat. And that was kind of the point of my Fighting Man thread, was like, no, like people complain about some of this stuff, but you know, it is not like it is not incomplete. It is a very complete game. And it's actually a very crunchy one if you play the game the way the book is telling you to play it. You know, right. what it's implying you to do. And you know, Malachi brings up a point. Holmes Basic was a response to that. But like when you read Holmes' book, which, you know, is beloved by many, and I don't want to take a dump on it, it does, in my opinion, misinterpret some things. That was part of how it changed. You know, I made a video about how the turn time, or the combat round time, went from a minute in 3 LBBs to 10 seconds. And that's where it kind of went going forward with BX, as it became 10 seconds in a lot of the basic expert companion immortal games. And I think when you compress time that much, it makes things like this war game hard to do, because you now have these 10-second time frame things. How do you scale up? You can't. Whereas like the 1 minute time frame does a really good job of like scaling from a small party of adventurers fighting kobolds and goblins in the ground to, you know, small armies fighting each other in the wilderness.
I think that's probably a response to people not getting kind of the abstraction behind the 1 minute. Like, you know, the one hit is supposed to represent, like, you know, maybe 1 out of 10 that you did that kind of just got through the kobold's defenses, and now, you know, it's laying dead on the floor. And they're like, well, I swung my sword once. Why does it take a minute though? Like, you know, that's kind of like how people interpreted it. If that makes sense. Yeah. And that's why they like shortened it to like the 6 to 10 seconds. Because like, well, you know, it only takes like maybe like, you know, 6 seconds to swing a sword once. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, right. You know, and it's like, and they're just not, there's nothing I could do for you if you're just not satisfied with the explanation that's the, like, you're rolling for the opening you got, and there was multiple strikes in that time, you know?
Yeah.
Like, you're not satisfied with that. There's nothing I can do for you, because that's what it is. So,
but that's also kind of like the GM needs to know that extraction is there, and they need to like properly narrated.
Yeah,
if a GM properly narrates it, then I think the players like get it.
Yeah.
yeah, we're right. And you don't. Yeah, go. Yeah, right. Exactly.
Kind of getting towards the end of the stream here. If is there anything I missed that you want to like touch on? That you feel like is huge that we missed talking about?
What do we think? Let's see. I guess I think we really kind of hammer down time. I think I'm pretty satisfied.
One section I liked was, and it's pretty brief, but like you mentioned that players also have a responsibility. People always talk about the GM's responsibility, but nobody really talks about how the players should behave themselves or conduct themselves. So
Yes.
I thought that was like a nice addition.
No, thank you. Yeah, it's yeah, no, right, and that's kind of why I included it, because like players kind of need to be told too, because they sort of forget the style. So the current, like the normal style of game is like the DM is setting up the campaign, and they just are basically a hose for output, and all the players are doing is collecting what the output and then imbibing, and there's nothing really what they're not really bringing too much kind of traditionally. So naturally, a lot of the advice would be around DM etiquette, because the players are only there to, as long as the players are engaging with the game, the players are fulfilling their end of the bargain as far as like kind of normal, the default is concerned. And if you're going to play in this sort of game, the player does have expectations.
Yeah, because we are talking about like a sandbox game where there's lots of player autonomy, and that takes a different mindset than I think what a lot of players currently possess in the hobby right now. A lot of players are like, I'm sitting here waiting for the num-nums from the referee, and it's like, you have to go out and get your own num-nums sometimes. So, you got to make the num-nums happen sometimes. That's just as much your responsibility as the referee. So, feed me, GM, feed me. And it's like, well, no, sometimes you got to do a little bit of cooking with the referee. Active play, as Block Watch Games here says here. But I think it is a mindset that like you kind of have to teach players sometimes to have that mindset, because they don't all possess it right out of the gate as they enter this hobby.
No, and if you're going to be a DM, like you do sort of like accept a leadership role, and if you're going to be a leader like for that group, because the game organizes basically around you to some extent, like that's sort of not exactly avoidable. You need to be like, and you need to sort of behave that way, and like there's a way to be like, good leadership is not tyranny, it's not like. So yeah, but at the same time, like the players there's a proper relationship with, what is it? People need to have proper relationship with their leaders. And so there is kind of something to be said, like that does need to sort of be discussed. And I think the advice, like I kind of harped on it as being for this game, but I think the advice would work in really any game as far as like player etiquette goes. So.
I think the DM kind of has like a weird position where, like you mentioned, they do take a leadership role because they're the ones running the game. They're the ones arbitrating the rules, coming up with like the nuances of the setting and stuff. But at the same time, they're also another player, so it can be kind of hard to find kind of like that balance. I find, and especially people talk about like abusive and asshole GMs a lot, but players can also be abusive and assholes, especially towards the GM. So.
Yeah, I mean, like that's what I was saying, like the filter is for, right? It's like the first line of defense is just not inviting certain people to your table. Like have a little discernment.
Yeah.
So. But yeah, well, there it is.
Yeah, at the end of the day, the GM is also there to have fun. So yeah, like people tend to forget that.
Yeah, well, and they talk about it like man, and it's like just look at the way kind of like influencer and influencer adjacent DMs like kind of talk about their session prep. Like watch them, really watch them, and how they describe it, and it is a burden, 100%.
Yeah.
Like they do not enjoy it. It is sort of like funny. Like it's always like cutesy, like, oh, this is, like I really hate this. Ha ha ha. My players don't respect me. And I'm like, I can't help but feel like kind of sad. That's like, it's very, very bleak that's you're sort of getting, not only like, are you kind of drawing engagement from that, but like, like that's resonating with people, obviously, I really hate that. So
yeah, so here's the link to the book. I think it's an affordable price for the book here. I had a question for you, because obviously you got the book set up for print on Amazon, and I'm having trouble getting my book set up. Did you have trouble with their setting things up on the back end? I'm just curious.
Not really. I kind of just did their, like, I had like their, this might be a little inside baseball, but like I had their I kind of went out on a bookshelf, and they just asked for a couple PDFs for like the cover and the contents, and they wanted, like, I had a little issue with the keywords, like they wouldn't let me set my page up because they were like they didn't like some of the keywords I was using, but we got it sorted eventually. It wasn't too bad once I figured out what was happening. Their way of communicating with people is like really weird. So I didn't really realize what they were having problems with for a while.
I was trying to set a Mockweasel to be on Amazon, and I was using their book editor, and I uploaded the interior files, and it's just like being weird and giving me errors on these pages. Like text is off the printed area, and it's like, but it isn't. And I sort of just but
yeah, I just did mine like in a doc, so there's some sort of formatting thing that's just sort of reading weird.
Maybe because it's a game with art and stuff.
Yeah.
Like I don't know, but I was just curious. I was just struggling with it, and I got frustrated and quit. So
yeah, I don't blame you.
But everyone should go check out John's book. He sent me a PDF copy, but I'm definitely going to be ordering a physical copy. I need to.
Oh, thank you.
I need to read off of the corpses of dead trees. It's just easier on my eyes.
The whole reason I bought a Kindle was so I can have digital copies and it not like absolutely obliterate my eyes. So
make your eyes bleed.
Yeah, the Kindle screens are great for that. So, but I have a multiple bookshelves, like just full of books too. So part of it's a space issue. That's why I got that too. So.
But yeah, I think the book is good. I think there's a lot of room out here for like good. You have Macree's Arbiter of Worlds, and I think for like really good GM advice, like there's not a lot of it out there that is actually good and usable, and is going to give you, I think, good results. And I think the old way has a proven track record. Otherwise, the hobby wouldn't. The new way stands on the shoulders of the old way, in my opinion. In a lot of respects, it's kind of been coasting on the magic that the old way produced, and so I think that having literature like this that kind of harkens back to that and gives advice about that is super, super helpful to people.
Yeah, well, that's why I say we're building a corpus, and it's like having Macree, like having Mr. Macree's work is a benefit. Because it's like having his insights along with my insights, and my understanding is that Mr. Jeffro is working on one as well. I think it's great that we're building sort of like there's multiple authors building an alternative corpus for people who are unsatisfied with the advice that they've received thus far, and it's like, again, folk advice, which is super irritating. It's just like kind of camera friendly personalities, kind of giving you their anecdotal experience, and it's very, very hard to replicate what they tell you to do.
It is, and sometimes I feel like they give advice and they don't really do what they say they're doing. They're telling you to do. It's like do this, and it's like, but you don't do it.
yeah. Like, I really want to know what those, like, I'm like genuinely curious, and not like a angry way, but I'm genuinely curious, like what is a like Matt Mercer's like session planning look like? Like,
well, he hands out a script to his players.
Yeah, hands out a script to his players. Yeah. Like, I'm assuming, obviously it's got to be scripted, but I mean, like even nominally, like he used to do his like GM or his DM advice videos, and I'm curious as to like how much that survived. So, but yeah,
well, his advice was like the most milquetoast generic advice.
yeah.
Like it's
Just have fun. I'm like,
Oh,
okay,
yeah,
thanks.
Don't stress out.
Yeah.
Like,
there's a fun gradient. Okay, like things could be good, better, or best. They could be bad, worse, or worst. It's not like not everything is built equal. So like fun is a symptom of like what you're doing. Fun is not the goal. Okay, fun is telling you that what you're doing is working to some extent. That's it. So to make the symptom kind of like the result, I don't know. It's just sort of it's not. I just don't think it's a viable way of sort of like constructing your game.
Yeah.
So you should be having fun. Like that just means it's working. But
Well, they use that as an excuse to like throw out the rules. It's like, well, it's
yes,
more fun for us to just like not even like roll for combat or like that
Don't
one
even-
guy XP whatever. But he's like,
Mhm.
yeah, I just let all the players like do something cool, and then the monster dies. I don't even track hit points. It's like, well, okay, well, I guess the players are having fun, but
they're not gonna have fun now, you monster.
yeah,
You're robbing them.
yeah,
I would be very irritated if that was
Yeah.
like, especially if I died under those circumstances.
yeah.
Like top to bottom, I would just be like, if I win, I'd be mad. If I lost, I'd be mad.
Because
Yeah.
it's like you expect me to track my hit points as a player.
Yeah.
Like you're not tracking hit points for the monster, you ass.
Yeah. Yeah. No. Right. Exactly. I feel the same way. Yeah. It's a problem. So I just don't. Yeah.
Well, for Vic too, I want to give Vic Vic's working on stuff. I want to give Vic a chance to talk about it. If you have anything, we haven't had a stream in a while. So like, is there anything
Yeah.
new you're working on you want people to know about as well, Vic?
Well, if my Kickstarter for Modern Necessities, the updated version of Modern Necessities coming up in March, let me grab the pre-launch link real quick, and I dropped it in the chat. People
do
want
that.
to follow that. There we go. You can also find a trailer on my YouTube channel for that. Just pick the Gorchev. But yeah, that's gonna be the updated version. If I make the stretch goals, it's gonna add like a little rule book for sci-fi / cyberpunk rules, one for steampunk / like Weird West type stuff, and then like a adventure module, kind of like a homage to Keep on the Borderlands, but I'm calling it Bunker in the Badlands. And yeah, so check that out. Otherwise, I've been working like the last week and a half or week or so. I've been working on 0E Dark 30, which John gave me that name to use. But yeah, that's kind of like my 0E sort of like white box inspired like modern game. It's coming along pretty well. I've written like 55 pages in like a week or something. So it's pretty close to playtesting. I just need to finish off the gear and like add some NPCs, and I can playtest it on the Guilded server. But yeah, that's what I've been working on. And like I said, it's white box inspired, but I'm giving it a lot of my own twists. So I actually gave the system my own name. I'm calling it Ammo Box. And if it's well received, that's probably what I'm gonna like be doing. That's just gonna be kind of one of my pet projects, I guess. Like, I'm just going to be releasing games for Ammo books, so we'll see. But yeah, that's about it, really.
People are probably wondering for me about Makuhito. So like, obviously Pod is available, but I'm trying to get the hardcover set up, and I've been struggling. I've found I think an issue with Affinity, and that is it does not export Pantone colors very well. So I don't know, just warning out there for others. I love Affinity, but I'm having a drawback here because I got quoted a price with the printer for a black color and a single Pantone color, which would be cheaper, specific Pantone red. And I just can't get the Pantone to get called out properly, no matter what I've tried, from the art through Affinity Publisher to the PDF. So probably going to have to spend a little bit of extra money, which will just cut into my profits, unfortunately. But to get a CMYK version of the book, and it'll just be a little more expensive. But it will. I just got to get the book printed. So I'm going to be a little late on delivering it, but it is being worked on, and I'm sorry it's taking a little longer. I don't feel as bad though, because I know people have done Kickstarters and have not delivered at all, and at least like at least you can get my book in a certain form at this point.
Yeah.
So it's just the hardcover that's like giving me troubles, and it's not because the book isn't finished. It's just technical issues.
Yeah.
So.
Well, Maliki asks if the Modern Necessity is going to be print on demand on Kickstarter. Yes, because after watching John struggles with his offset print, I'm never doing that unless I can someday pay somebody to do it for me. PODs I can set up in maybe 20 minutes. Yeah, so.
And this is not going to demand backers to cover the unexpected costs. No, I don't expect it to be that much more. And I set my goals, I hope, with all the math I've done, to account for such contingencies as these. So, But John, thank you for coming on. I hope people check out the book.
Sure.
The link is in the video description. It's in the chat as well. And I think again, it's useful referee advice that's not going to kill your game in 6 sessions, I think. So,
that's the goal. That's the hope. Let's have more than we would have had. I like to have a positive. Yeah, at least 9. Yeah, I do what I can. Be all right if I plug my stuff real quick?
Oh, go for it. Yeah, of course.
So I am on X at McGowan John N. And I am also on Substack at johnnmcgowan.substack.com. So I kind of just post. So on my X account, I pretty much just post. I pretty much just post just general advice as it pops in my head, or just sort of it's more conversational. And then for Substack, it's really a repository for my fiction. I am attempting to. So I'm kind of a little bit of an amateur writer. Well, I'm a real author at this point. I published a book.
Yeah.
And
you got to be humble about it anymore. Yeah, you published a book.
So, but I'm going to try my hand at writing some fiction. So
Nice.
I'm going to do an adventure story, a buddy adventure story. And otherwise, my long form tabletop advice content will be there as well. So subscribe to my Substack.
I do have links to your Twitter and your Substack in the video description below, so people check that out, and a link to your book. So
if you get the book and you like it, make sure you leave a review. Amazon really likes that. So right. That's about it. That's all my stuff.
And then we got a late super chat from the lovely gentleman at Black Lodge Games for your Pantone colors. Thank you, man.
Yeah.
We appreciate it. You guys are gentlemen and scholars. So everyone should check out Black and thespians. Everyone should check out Black Lodge Games too.
Yeah.
Good guys, and they've been doing the Lord's work on Candela Obscura. So
excellent reviews. Excellent reviews.
So, and I think Patty's Parlor is just coming in late at the end here. Sorry, bro.
Hey, Patty.
But yeah, thanks for coming on, man. I'm definitely going to be getting a physical copy as soon as I can here. Awesome. And I'll leave a review as well. So everyone check out John's book. I think it's valuable material that we need more of in this hobby. Not just a rule set, but I do think there's a space here for people to write these kinds of books about advice on running games from a point or a place of experience as well. So yeah. Any last words from you, gentlemen, or should we just we good? We closing this out?
I've said my piece.
Yep.
All right. Well, I want to thank everyone for showing up. It means a lot. Thank you, Black Lodge, for the super chat. It means a lot. And hopefully another stream next week. Trying to organize other guests as well. And this year I really want to talk to lots of interesting people. And kind of like I said in my last video, just keep it positive, talk about the things we like, and just have a good time.
Exactly.
That's more edifying than just being angry about everything all the time.
Yeah.
Correct.
But yeah, thank you all for watching, and we'll catch you guys next week.
Dag iedereen.
Bye-bye.
See ya.